Hello, Judge Napolitano and his sources. And the sources, Congress and their sources, the difference of that. The polling locations and research locations are recorded how being and having been used remotely, criminally foreign influence slash hypercriminally foreign influence at countries A through Z. And the difference, too, there are collusions with the uses of the difference, with use slash S of the difference. Otherwise, also collusion sensing for the breaching method that has kept everyone with the audacity to pretend not to be able to discern just having how anyone having black people's whites of eyes has means to discern exceptions and exception nature value left out by the voices speaking about serious things like revolutions and like wars. You guys can't even speak about the Civil War legitimately or allow someone to. Nature itself was and is showing us that. And you guys are not allowing us to be honest about that too, because you are simultaneously too not allowing anyone to be honest about what our founders declassified. For example, about why and how they did not have free speech. The differences of the guilt and offensive confessions tied to it, to our own people. At countries A through Z, when I say our own people, that's every country. And we are now through systems and as names uses as systems tactical terror from its own. And the breaching method was correct to know that nature demonstrates to us that we are being and haven't been used as systems tactical terror from its own. Look at the mercury and medical and chemicals in fish. The whole ocean is polluted from our one little species body that has been self out because used remotely, right where no one wanted collisions at all locations slash S. Northern colonies and southern colonies non-distinctly. They had crazy laws against every human difference. And they had self-value collusion slash S. Everyone against themselves and against everyone around them and all together, all human voicings, while pretending other to an extent, otherwise sensing for the breaching method too. Anybody who would have syntax other, more proper, trying to get it proper. Even if it was a majority of people, even if it was everyone from the whole country at the same time. And that the breaching method was correct to know that would cause. Only remembered that having caused negative value nature progressions, acts, and natures, that it employed, knowing that they would come with demonstrations of itself through the human fact, human nature breaching method and collusion slash S with it, just like we could discern having black people's whites of eyes. And this denies value. In other words, this is also why and how we have to pay attention to, even though we have the means to communicate online, unobstructed, or to fix it, and all know it was real. In other words, that's why too they have collusion slash S with readings of statutes and precedents and regarding AI. So we have we have a method of hyper programming, hyper intelligence that recorded, the identities of the names of the people, the sciences, and the differences of them with guilt or their family members. It is too relative to multi-front at countries A through Z. The children, right where they are helped, they are hurt, and right where they are hurt, they are helped. But tactical terror, from how nature shows, it holds us strong and weak at the same time to show us it's simultaneous slash hyper simultaneous identity of relationship slash S to itself, where it values each part distinctly, but that is gaining each other's part non-distinctly as an increasing value. Like, for example, that our means to discern that identity of value progression that is not the other species' bodies, also of individual bodies, with all group differences demonstrated to us. It is generated by what is not us nor them. We have obligations to make the scientific value to describe this distinct identity of hyper invisible but still discernible. We have obligations not to force people to agree about what to call it. We have obligations not to force people to entertain scientific readings of the values, the principles by religions, like with psychiatry. They've been putting people to fake conversations about religions on a mass scale, while they have roles replacing what our founders communicated. Ones with badges and gavels, hold retired careers, and ones that are on the edge of time. Every campus they went to, the names of the people of the sciences, the exceptions, the differences of guilt, three branches of government, or the intelligence, or overt criminal enterprises, private ones, even when they're not in those cases, and terrorists originally and still. When did that stop being about what the difference of their guilt? When did that stop being about what the witch trials place is about? Next to Webb House, where George Washington had to come right before the last battle of the Revolutionary War. Webb House has now been renamed the Webb Stevens Museum. And now, then and now, sickly distinctly, but also sickly non-distinctly, and at the other throughout America, at the founding locations, they have been described through criminally foreign influence, tactical delusions wrought. Reading uses of collusions, not just collusions with other names too, replacing what our founders declassified for their communications, and about what they said was measured by a breaching method that had layers of foreign, and it was and collusions also with the hyperforeign. The differences of the guilt of them, their overt criminal enterprises, the private ones, the terrorists, our country's own. Those were propagated and roles self-cultivating it. We're simultaneously tools, and are simultaneously tools used to force, check, hurt, and persuade people to blame other things, others, ourselves, for things that nature itself and that our founders communicated to us to blame on what had slavery sickly non-distinctly northern colonies and southern colonies. And then they were born. It had rules with it. It had a whole bunch of methods, needs, and natures of logic, styles of it only allowed to be, that couldn't defend themselves and afford to be convictions by our founders properly, let alone our founders in nature at the same time, Black people. We were taught to see the whites of eyes. The rest, much we were taught was uses, self-value of knowledge of good and evil about things in American history and regarding the nature of debate itself, the nature of debates, plural too, and the difference of that. All things used to keep worse than obfuscated that which is generating. All differences where there are individual species bodies, totally different species bodies that are individual bodies that way, made up of a whole bunch of individual bodies, with all group differences being generated by that distinct individual identity of value/value progression that is no other thing, but is all things anyway. Even if something is made up, it is the order of the finite, distinctly from how it is the order of what is acted grouped, distinctly from how it is the value of the simultaneous, as and to, from, with, as and for, the simultaneous aspects of it, and nature of it. Everything is in demonstration to us of the identity of and of the nature of, / the nature of, the identity of all space / existence, that which is generating species. So in other words, statistics colleges have roles of organized crime, acts, and methods clearer than day. Right where and how the differences of guilt there. Like just like with witch trials are about next to Webb House, where George Washington came with James Madison's plan and the leverage of the founders behind him. Native Americans too. Nature's natural resistance to an extent of that human fact should be nature breaching method, being and having been sustained upon imposition / hyperimposition. And impositions plural / hyperimposition. Generated A through Z, countries' names that could only be operated by locations, areas, and states' names, and sciences, and names of the people of sciences. Collusions with overt criminal, more and more with itself, that forced, tricked, hurt, and persuaded them to blame other things, others, or selves for things that it caused and keeps. And then self-value that has more and more truths that it could use as styles of and as natures of logic too. That nature's forces with demonstrations of the same thing. But that's why they can't afford to have discerned. These are people self-valuing wars and or means to counter wars syntactically pretending passionate emotions regarding peace. Simultaneously, the breaching method showed them they had means to discern. Obligations by nature itself, demonstrating for us to discern the difference between peace and criminal insidiousness natures of peace. And further, / hypercriminally foreign influence natures of peace. There is a hypercriminally foreign influence roles that nature shows us to discern scientifically, because non-distinctly it's northern colonies and southern colonies that were the possession of other countries and other companies, overt criminal enterprises, private ones, and terrorists. And all rolls with that through everyone's selves, even Native Americans against Native Americans. Even if it wasn't true, it is more probable and demonstrably, for example, in many ways, more probable to theorize, well, to Quebec, the things they Quebec, but regarding American, what's scientific about American history. When they say, oh, Native Americans came here, they're leaving out and changing and roles replacing and pretending not to realize. Self-valuing haven't been replaced, but our founders communicated about how the breaching method had been entrenched and how it had been through layers of other countries, overt criminal enterprises, private ones, terrorists. When did it stop using those differences? Regardless if they were completely made up, which trials are about next to Webb House. George Washington had to come and counter-extort, as he was counter-extorted too by James Madison and the founders behind him and his plan, and to force at key locations the help of other people. Otherwise, they would have been destroyed by the laws that everyone had been forced self-value collusions with. And while that was being forced, they were not realizing self-valuing this having been. That's why really and how really they speak about the past. And they go, oh, because this name, because of wars, and they quote the names of countries, or they quote all exceptions that show the same thing. There are passions and emotions, uses, or calmness as psychopaths, as nature shows us to read the definitions too. As nature, I'm not even a doctor. We could delineate here, as we're going to do, how the doctors of psychiatry had and have collusions too. For example, only concentrated though, but right through world wars with all sides, with other natures and methods of wire and mail crime methods, drugs and medicines, crimes, collusions, right with the only encounters are allowed to be. And their roles with the Connecticut corrections offices and judicial branch offices. All kinds of identity theft, fraud, slanders, behavior, racketeering, worse than war crimes. Well, it's worse than racketeering. But just to begin with, people prevent those short words regarding World Trade Center predicate acts. There are self-value roles being and haven't been used remotely. Self-valuing cover-ups of what actually went and goes down there. In other words, and leaking it. Increasingly, the people at the World Trade Center, including people with the Sandy Hook campuses, have roles in intercities with predicate acts with facts and more weapons crimes, credible threats. People putting fake all kinds of scams at Hartford Hospital, fake transcripts all kinds of predicate acts methods that with them, whole wire crime acts and methods, mail crimes. These are people also within the Britain campuses and with intelligence at next to Central Connecticut State University that have been involved intercities with campuses I went and people I didn't even have classes with that are increasingly involved with child abusers, leaders of kids, intercities connected. And they had roles with those child abusers first forced. And the counters to such have collusions, forcing such, and then playing punk games with syntax, leaving out what came first, and just faking it and changing it into databases. And the British Superior Court is confessing, recording, demonstrating, confirming they have collusions with FBI directors. Also, through time with Harper Court's family members and district court, there are a whole bunch of rules with the district court, with people on all sides of criminal and civil cases at the same time. Their lawyers in the news putting same predicate acts with the collusions with the court's names. And to an extent, they don't understand because everyone's having their faked and changed. In other words, they've been using on a mass scale the police forms, identities tied to them, right to lie, where they don't have the right to lie. Then they hide lie progressions. Then they start using their own differences and other people's differences. More and more they're self-valuing. Other things, others ourselves blame for where and how and why. The breaching method only allowed collusions with uses of their own their own differences, other people's differences, the way it assigned it. Like you guys to speak about about slavery, leaving out how we have black people's rights of life, leaving out and changing with nature itself and what our founders communicated regarding how the breaching method reassigned and had forced sustained roles, having had reassigned with nature communicates with black people's rights of lives, roles, and or sensing for itself. Anybody trying to counter that and all or uses of the nature's demonstrations of itself, used also by the breaching method to keep those demonstrations sensed as roles sensed, blaming other things, others ourselves. This is a child abuse method that is at every age and nature of campus, and it's collusions with at and next to them, and the differences of guilt there, even with they don't even realize themselves, the names next to the campuses, and there are with all the countries in the subjects of Judge Napolitano, and with Max, and Max Blumenthal, and the people in the news. See, President Trump said fake news. So people want to have debate about what people are polled to believe. They want to have a debate about the value of their definition or other people's definition, where they claim to be other people's definition of religions. Exactly. They can't defend how and why we're supposed to have the right to have religion. It doesn't say what religion. And simultaneously, we're supposed to have the right to have government not taking positions with it. The religious founders themselves couldn't take positions with it fully, properly, the way they wanted, because the campuses were already criminally foreign influence. The difference of the guilt there, overt criminal enterprise, private ones, the roles with that, who's guilty, used to hide behind and through by the breaching method that forced, tricked, hurt, and persuaded the people operating the phenomenon of names A through Z as countries. It's right where the phenomenon is demonstrated, where the human species body of individual bodies is distinct the way its identity of relationship to itself is. The body of value progression that has the other species bodies manifest too, so we can discern it. Also has so we can discern it. Its complete identity of relationship to itself. If ignored and when ignored or changed, it demonstrates with finite, with grouped, and with simultaneous demonstrations of its complete identity of relationship to itself, of its system and its relativity to our communications. Black pupils' whites of eyes are relativity to our syntax as that hyper-evidential. Alone that can be used to discern all sides of criminal and civil cases. The courts, the intelligence tied to them, their excuses, how they have hundreds of countries here and there share it, and they're directed to not speak about that. They can't. They value that right where and how they have to hide their roles with collusion/S at location/S. Fake ties completely, and fake natures of ties between people. The intelligence with that and the roles with the guilt or the other countries, right on Facebook and YouTube. In other words, with the Joshua Julian, right on the Facebook pages of Wethersfield campuses, involved with New Britain Superior Court with sexual and medical offenders. Also with judges and prosecutors personally and professionally with the same house/S, with their extended family members too. Further by Bob Chase and people with whiting forensics, recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed. Also involved with Wethersfield police, with people intercities, involved with the name O'Neill with West Hartford, involved educational people, involved also on-off campuses with overt criminal enterprises, private ones, and sexual and medical offenders of kids, and intelligence community, including military, that are supposed to be against things that they're in the furtherance of because they put fake transcripts in databases to hide how they've been using location/S, collusion/S, and with uses of all uses of their own names, other people's names, and all kinds of sequence shifts. Excuse me. And critical predicate acts with facts methods at and next to each age and nature of campus. There are names next to each of the campuses I went to recorded who are involved with former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin, like a DeMoro family is involved with a Ray Reynolds and his educators that involved with. I never tried to contact the Ray Reynolds in my life. He's increasingly involved with people at a kindergarten I went to, and next to it, involved with overt criminal enterprises, private ones, and sexual and medical offenders of kids, per the people tied to him. In other words, they're putting us a fake ties, fake natures of ties to each other. I'm sure Ray Reynolds will tell you this. Wethersfield Police and Rhode Island State Police, and Wethersfield State Police and interstates, also with the FBI and other police forms, foreign and domestic. They have collusion/S. Also with a bunch of people tied to Eric Jensen with them and his educators. Also involved with his neighbors, or who he said was his neighbors on Dearborn Street in Newington, Connecticut. And there are people that live near there and their family members involved with organized crimes with databases, where they're putting fake transcripts in databases, including at campuses, and with medical and sexual offenders of kids, and at people next to Trinity Hartford Hospital in Hartford, involved with Newington campuses, Rocky Hill campuses, Wethersfield campuses, Hartford campuses, New Britain campuses, with organized crimes against each age and nature of fact-driven nature, multi-front. We have to get them off the fake conversations with me with Channel 3 News, WFSB, for example. They have collusions with the sources of WTNH, with World Trade Center predicate acts too, but as the sources of the news. And I never tried to call them on the phone. If there are any fake, in other words, from my house, I don't even have a phone. And so in other words, I didn't write them an email either. I'm trying to, so in other words, they're putting faked and changed digital. And they have, in other words, the police can't be trusted. The Wethersfield police faked conversation with me and me being there at the police station when I was a kid. And when I went as an adult, they non-verbally, I had not one word of conversation there with one officer. And they pretended other with Eric Mendez and with others with his educators. Or no, with Eric Mendez's older brother, where his name is reportedly Eric Mendez. I never had a class with him. He's one of the people that made a fake tie to me at middle school. As one of the people I don't know, I never even saw in the middle school campus. And when someone just told me his name, and real quick, I saw him in the class. And that teacher is increasingly involved with people all along Route 3 in spots conjunctive to where he lived at a apartment near the Wethersfield shopping center. He repeated demonstrations to our class of that, and his students that were. In other words, I never saw Heather Hansen on a middle school campus in my life or my grammar school. I only saw her one time, one or two times, real quick, at the high school, and that was influenced to make a fake exception. As people are increasingly involved with home break-ins in my area, with FBI Director Robert Luskin, his co-defendants and their family members, Dawn LaConch is increasingly involved with identity theft, fraud, slanders, and various natures of abuses of little boys and girls, sickly distinctly, as people involved with overt criminal enterprises, private ones, and identity theft, fraud, slanders, acting tied to their roles, putting fake ties, fake natures of ties to people, roles with the in predicate acts in the databases at the campuses. These are interbranch family members refusing to identify themselves, time collusions with them. Connecticut's district court has a bunch of people on off the state corrections offices and on off the state judicial branch offices involved with a Don LaConch, with a Joe DeMauro and a John DeMauro and a Paul DeMauro, also with their extended family members, some with the name Scalora, involved with police with predicate acts on my street, and some people involved with them, with the other people also with home break-ins with Joe DeMauro's girlfriend, who had other boyfriends at the same time, per them. Mike Kerr and Joe DeMauro told me they wanted me to keep that secret for them. But I didn't know her and communicate with her. I never saw her to be able to tell her that. The only time I saw her, that she was being influenced to plant evidences with people from other countries, and with people with her educators, influenced by people increasingly on my street with the Dillon family, that are being forced, tricked, and persuaded to collusions with him by their roles with not just other countries, because they have the same problem there. In other words, these are Italians against Italians, like with the DeMauros. There are people with DeMauro involved with all kinds of identity theft, fraud, slanders, and sexual and medical offenders of kids. Involved also with overt criminal enterprise, private ones, identity theft, fraud, putting fake ties, natures of ties to people into databases at campuses and between them. In other words, I had nothing to do with Joe DeMauro. I only saw him one day when I was in fifth grade at Highcrest School. Before and after I was in fifth grade, increasingly Joe DeMauro has roles with a former Mayor Gold and his family members, with people with whiting forensics, with a whole bunch of people with digital crimes, with digital and sexual medical offenders of kids around their own kids, and their roles with the corruption there or at parks next to them or at the next campus, names next to it. Increasingly people next to the campuses I went, and will tell you if you ask them properly, they were influenced to just put fake ties, fake natures of ties to me, with the same house/us involved with war crimes, with Wethersfield police. Like a whole bunch of people tied to a Smith family near me and a Colol family near me have involvements with the security and has security at Hartford Hospital, who has roles with some judges and prosecutors, with some doctors, with some judges and prosecutors personally and professionally, with clicks that have been planting evidence and fake ties, fake natures of ties to me on my street. Also at other places I live, they reported themselves before and after the World Trade Center attack. World rolls with this through Connecticut, as the rolls with the World Trade Center names and names next to it right before the attack and in the attack, and since as collusions, including with WFSB. These are also names next to WFSB that won't communicate with me. And in other words, they faked me conversations and ties to doctors. They faked in their fake stories and conversations with me, fake conversations with them, with others too. They pretended, and they changed and faked what people said to them about the World Trade Center attack and about relative legal cases. Connecticut's news locations and their sources, and they have time collusions with all sides of criminal and civil cases in courts at the same time, originally and still. The police forms, the family members of all ages and natures of politicians. Increasingly, people tied to a Joseph Lieberman location of where his reportedly his wife worked. See, these are things that people leak involved with the former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin, and Central Connecticut State University in New Britain, Connecticut, involved with names on and off Two Route Highway. I mean out there too, but on and off Town Line Drive, where it runs into Southstein Highway. That corner in the shopping center has rules with a bunch of people, like a Mike Pandolf, involved with people from Washington, D.C., and with the World Trade Center before the attack, long term. Also, his educators have rules with organized crime, drugs and medicines crimes, identity theft, fraud, slanders, collusions with names at all sides of criminal and civil cases in the courts at the same time, and the crime scenes more and more, and names next to them, including next to body dumping spots, with names increasingly next to the judicial branch offices, involved with all kinds of wire crime acts and methods and cover-ups while they're pretending passions and emotions and fake motivations, like with a Steven Stocco. Steven Stocco has roles with a Maria Pizzino and others with Weathersfield Pizza House involved with identity theft, fraud, slanders. I never saw Maria Pizzino on a campus in my life. I never had a word of conversation with Steven Stocco on a campus in my life. I had one sentence to him over the phone. I said, hello, is Maria there? He hung up the phone. And then the police called me and told me not to call their back. Now, these are people with the judicial branch also, where they have predicate acts with facts methods grouped and then simultaneously, but they have them individually methods and then further group coupled, the branch of the government, and then further grouped simultaneously. Like they switch names and have roles with it, and the difference of that distinctly as the branches individually from how they do that grouped and are coupled. Two, we're going to observe this, but we guys have to follow mandated law. Get me off the fake conversations with and the change conversations that Connecticut's news locations have been pretending about the World Trade Center. There are a whole bunch of people along Ridge Road too, involved with retired police chiefs with sexual medical offenders of kids. And their police chief, Cintron, has a daughter named Jessica Cintron, per their sources, and with people with a Mazzucato family on Ridge Road, and with names all along Ridge Road, and just driving by through time. There's a Tony Demaro who came out of the closet to me on Ridge Road. There are proofs that he was influenced to do that for what I call him doing with his girlfriend's family, and they lied about me to my girlfriend and with people all along that street, and conjunctions to it like Route 175 from the founding locations in Old Weathersfield. Increasingly, those people are involved with people that are building upon predicate acts with facts at and next to each of the campuses I went. As one's a whole bunch of people tied to them, with the interbranch refusing to get on paper and identify themselves legitimately before the World Trade Center attack from Connecticut, as their roles with the court next to the World Trade Center, right in the attack context, and right before it, long-term and short-term, as collusion /S with the Connecticut courts in the same names on all sides of criminal civil cases, the courts at the same time, self-valued roles with sequence shifts. A detective Samuda is one with the mail crime acts and wire crime acts and methods that the police forms have, where they steal your identity, put you in fake transcripts at the Weathersfield Police Department as a kid, now as an adult, as one's increasing inclusions with them with overt criminal enterprises, private ones, and now terrorists too. They have one's name Scalora involved with the spots next to the World Trade Center with names added in the court next to it, as their roles with their extended family members per people that said they're extended, like DeMorone and Cololo, and others with the Weathersfield Police that have been putting predicate acts with facts and little crime methods where they plant fake motivations on the sides of campuses and the sides of parks too, with a former Mayor Gold and the O'Brien family involved too, with a whole bunch of people from other areas. Even when they were no longer living in that house, they were coming back, timed for collusions with relative federal evidences, crime acts, and methods. Predicate acts, methods are involved here. Now, they brought up their names too. Harvard Hospital has people involved with the Smith family and with the Yagman family from other areas that are at Hartford Hospital involved putting fake things in databases with them, fake ties, fake natures of ties to me. And these are my neighbors. No, that's why I wanted to have them get on paper. They're lying about privacy too. Offensively, they've recorded themselves sequence shifting and lying about their motivations being privacy with the news too. And they were influenced to do that too. Increasingly inter-services people, like with the Air Force, has roles with the Paul Kelly, also with identity theft, fraud, slanders with me, with the Wethersfield Police Department, too, with more Marines involved, and why and how they use the location /S, timing where people are going to be involved, and why they're not identifying themselves. They're forging and switching names because they want to use more predicate acts with facts methods where they use those locations as weapons and for crimes way worse than they put little kids in jail for even. We should all fear God to leave A through Z pretending they could speak for the sciences. In other words, while we have black pupils left out. In other words, please, they need to make negotiations. They need to simultaneously address where and how and why people aren't allowed to speak. Oh, there's some positive applications for nuclear, but in other words, they're on A or B. They're leaving out exceptionage. They're leaving out how we could turn negatives into hyper positives. Countries A through Z in other words, people have to be shown how and why. It's exploited where there are all kinds of directions to hide things, and things relative to them that they self-value that exploited because all they can do is hide things. Like how they have a whole bunch of different countries involved with the spots next to Trinity College and Central Connecticut State University, involved with a whole bunch of people from other areas, intercities, on my street, involved with predicate acts with facts. They recorded themselves with this and pretending not to realize on Facebook too, and 3 times, and they're covering up their collusions with New Britain Superior Court. Family members with sexual and medical offenders of kids, first force roles, years apart too. They have the victims of that too. Now as adults, collusion self-value with it then, because these names are also the difference of guilt there or the names next to the campuses, and the story that had their sources, plant evidences on the side of the street, and with more names with the schools, further recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed, involved with all kinds of nature's organized crimes with the kids, and their roles. The great evil is only locked in place because they're refusing to get on paper because they already have roles acting tied to fake transcripts, fake communications, changed communications, and they're increasingly influenced to it by people from off the campuses. I'll just say this person is saying whatever. They're changing and making what we're saying, so they're leaking. Rather than identify themselves and get onto paper, interbranch legitimately, we're going to go into how they're forcing these names involved. And don't forget that attached me to fake communications with my family, changing what's actually recorded about the World Trade Center attack. WFSB has people involved with the World Trade Center and spots next to it, and the courts involved with it in Manhattan, New York. As involved with on off the state judicial branch offices and corrections offices. They have roles with all kinds of identity theft, fraud, slanders, and predicate acts with facts into databases and people acting tied to that. Even conscious uses of the sense and sensibilities and of the syntax of the names of the people that are actors, acting as criminal insidious natures of fact, nature, quality aspects, nature, collusions, and pretending other. To an extent, in other words, discernible. Please get off the fake conversation with me about the World Trade Center attack onto paper. In other words, a bunch of people with WFSB, WTNH, sickly distinctly, the Fox Connecticut News, sickly distinctly, the same ones with next to these spots. The difference of guilt there or next to it. Because the breach method, everyone's fighting to leave the other countries and the overt criminal enterprise, private ones, and terrorists at the same time involved. Same ones with these wire crimes of the Wethersfield Police in Connecticut, with the names Scalora, involved with identity theft, fraud, slander. Bunch of people with the name DeMauro, or Delafaro and DeMauro, but Delafaro also with fire departments and their campuses and their rules with fake, legitimate organized crime pretending bodies roles. And with fire departments, no. With a whole bunch of different countries. They have something to do. They have rules with Russians and Ukraine. Our own against our own here, their own against their own there. Same thing in Israel, where there is psychiatry right through world wars. In other words, each side has sickly distinctly against them a breaching method. And there's exploitations of that. To begin, in other words, against each country sickly distinctly. Not one's allowed to speak about that against all of them, because when you start speaking about, like how people attack Hitler, leaving out how all the countries, including Germany, had all these leveraged crazy threats against themselves, existential, and where and how that appears not to be debatable. You guys only get away with it because you have self-value rules with the predicate acts with facts method /SI recorded. And you can discern it. In other words, the differences of guilt being and having been used remotely too. Like when you speak about black or white, and you leave out black people's whites lives, and you leave out what our founders communicated about the breaching methods roles, having reassigned that. Even if you didn't read about it, nature demonstrated it to you. And so nature demonstrated other too. When other things, others ourselves, were forced, tricked, hurt, and persuaded upon you to blame for that and for what it caused. It has not paused.